Hi, and welcome to the Dreaded HQ DVD. In the next half hour or so, you're going to become a dreading expert. All the essential info is right here, and all you have to do is watch. Before you begin dreading your hair, there are a few things you'll need to consider. First off, the length of your hair is pretty important. If your hair is shorter than 3 inches, you'll spend a lot of extra time maintaining your dreads as they mature. On the other hand, if your hair is long, the dreads will lock up easily, but the initial dreading takes ages. 6 to 8 inches is ideal. It's long enough to reduce maintenance, yet not so long it will take 2 days to put them in. You can always color or bleach your dreads after you put them in, but depending on what you're after, it may be a good idea to do it before you dread. For example, if you're going for one even color, it will be easier to do so before dreading it. Or if you're looking to have multicolored dreads, you'll want to wait and color them after they've had a chance to mature. Coloring and bleaching can dry the hair out a bit, which will help it lock up faster. But drying the hair too much can weaken the hair and cause breakage later, so don't leave the products on longer than instructed. Also be aware that repeated bleaching of new growth at the roots will cause severe damage over time unless it's done very carefully to avoid re-bleaching previously bleached hair. If you don't re-bleach every few weeks, you'll end up with dark roots. Maintaining a color with bleaching or dyeing is a lot of work, so give it some thought. You might just want to leave them natural. It's a lot easier. Because dyeing is not as tough on the dreads as bleach, it's safer to maintain a color with repeated dyeing, but it's still a chore. It's pretty popular to bleach darker dreads because it tends to highlight the individual locks and makes them stand out more. You can achieve a similar effect by lightening just the tips of each dread. The advantage of lightening only the tips is that you won't need to relighten them as the hair grows. For more information on bleaching and dyeing, check out the maintenance section. You're almost ready to get started. This process takes a while, so make sure both the dreadee and the dreader are comfortable. Get some snacks and start a good movie or some chill tunes. In addition to a comfortable dreading environment, you're also going to need one super duper dread kit, hair clips, a towel, a spray bottle of water, and at least one person to help you dread. Sectioning your hair is an important step to making attractive dreads. It's every bit as important as the rest of the dreading process, so don't rush through it. It's normal for sectioning to take a while, especially if you're making smaller dreads. You can't change the size of your sections after you've made the dreads, so decide how you want to do them beforehand. Good sectioning has lots of advantages. Sections that are nearly square create round dreads as opposed to flat beaver tails. Clean sections make finding and fixing loose hair much easier. Well-sectioned dreads will also have roughly the same amount of hair, so they'll take about the same amount of time to lock up, and they'll grow at about the same speed once they are locked. Achieving clean, nearly square sections with the same amount of hair may sound easy, but tedious would be a better word. Hair density varies greatly from one part of your head to the other. In some areas, the sections will have to be larger to have the same amount of hair. There are no straight lines or clear reference points, and you're working on a rounded surface that's probably moving. Close approximations, compromises, and creativity are going to be key. Since only the sections at the hairline and those beside the part are visible after the dreads mature, small discrepancies won't be noticeable in the finished dreads. When choosing the size of your sections, keep in mind that the section size determines the size of the dreads. The more hair a section has, the easier it is for the dread to lock up and continue locking as it grows. Very large dreads will have problems drying, and very small dreads are usually great in number, which will make them look fuller. After you start your dreads and they begin to mature, they will shrink and become more dense. Eventually, they will finish shrinking, begin to grow in length, and thicken up. In most cases, the thickness of your newly backcombed dreads is a pretty good indication of their fully matured size. An average size is best all around. The dreads will be small enough that they will dry without a lot of extra effort, but they won't be so small that they'll have trouble locking. So what's the magic size? It varies depending on your hair, but generally around 1 inch square is a good average. 2 inch square is probably the biggest you'd want to go. Any larger than that and the dreads will look pretty sparse and they'll be an extraordinary chore to dry. 1/2 inch sections seem to be about the smallest you can go without problems. In average hair, this will give you about 130 dreads. You'll need to wash your hair with dread soap to remove oils and residues just before you dread it, so right before sectioning is an ideal time. Wash your hair and scalp once as you normally would, then rinse and wash it again, but the second time concentrate on the hair itself. This second washing will leave it extra clean and ready to knot. Most people find it easier to work with damp hair. Keep a spray bottle of water or a locking accelerator handy. As the hair begins to dry, you can spray it occasionally. The accelerator will also make backcombing much easier when you get around to it. Now would be a good time to decide where your part should be. Depending on your natural part, it may or may not work out better to have a row of dreads right in the center. If the hairline has a peak, the center dread is definitely preferable. The center row will eventually lay to one side or the other. Parting them down the middle or not is mainly a matter of personal preference, but it's a good idea to follow any strong natural parts you may have. Doing so will result in the hair growing into desired dreads with less intervention. Fortunately, your natural parts will adjust to the dreads over time, and your hair will cooperate more and more each year you have your dreads. We recommend dividing the hair into 4 large sections or quarters, and then dividing each of these into smaller sections. This gives you straight lines to follow as you work. While you're sectioning one quarter, the other 3 can be clipped back out of the way. How the hair is divided into quarters will vary depending on where you decided to put your part. If your hair is parted down the center, you will have 4 even quarters. If you have a row of dreads down the center, you will need to include it in either the left or right side. After your quarters are made, you can begin dividing them into sections. The best place to begin is in the front of the hairline. These sections will be the most visible. By starting with them first, you can make sure their spacing is right and that they look good. Other less obvious sections can be worked in around them. Try to stick to your section size and keep the section square whenever possible. You can use the ruler on the comb handle for quick reference. After you create each section, use a rubber band to hold it in place. They won't need to be tight, just snug enough that they won't slip off while you're sectioning the rest of your hair. When you're ready to backcomb, they will be removed. The hair elastics, which are made of plastic rather than rubber, work well for this since they don't pull the hair as much when being removed. After the first row is sectioned off, remove the clips and create the next row. You can begin clipping all the sectioned hair together to keep it out of your way. Continue sectioning the quarter row by row. When you've worked your way through the quarter, clip it all together and move on to the next. When all the hair is sectioned, you are ready to backcomb. If you're having trouble sectioning, you may choose to enlist the help of one of our Dreadhead certified salons. Now for the fun part. Well, almost. There's a couple things you can do just before backcombing to make it way easier. First, having the locking accelerator dried in the hair really helps. If you'll be using the lock pepper while backcombing, the accelerator isn't nearly as crucial. In either case, you'll want the hair dry before you start backcombing, so break out the hairdryer if you've got one and, well, you know what to do with a hairdryer. The best place to start backcombing is appropriately in the back. The first few dreads are going to be a learning experience, and while some learn faster than others, it's a good idea to do that learning in the back, where if it's not quite perfect, it will have time to work itself out in privacy rather than in everyone's face.
Now when the fun looked reflected.
You'll begin backcombing right at the scalp. Pull the other sectioned hair away from the chosen section and remove the rubber band. You'll only be combing the first 2 or 3 inches of hair, those closest to the scalp. The key here is to comb quickly but progress slowly. This is the most confusing part for those new to backcombing. You will make many quick strokes and see very little happening, and this is actually what you want. Some strokes won't push any hair forward, and that's okay. If more than a few hairs are pushed forward on each stroke, the hair is being packed forward too quickly, and you'll end up with loops and possibly poofy palm trees. A poofy palm tree is a short, fuzzy wad of hair that sometimes looks like a palm tree sticking straight up from your head. When this occurs, the hair loses a lot of length, and the dreads usually end up much wider and poofier than anticipated. If you accidentally make one of these, you can comb it back out, starting at the tips and slowly working your way to the roots, like backcombing in reverse. One thing you can do to prevent hair from getting wadded up and pushed forward too fast is to pull it back with your other hand every few strokes. After you get used to this, it will become part of the motion and it will come very naturally. You don't want to twist the hair around and around as you backcomb, but rolling it slowly back and forth will ensure it gets combed evenly all the way around. After about 50 strokes or so, you should see some very knotted hair packing up right at the scalp. Keep in mind this first inch hurts the worst since you're pulling almost directly on the scalp. After a bit more of the dread is formed, the force will be more evenly distributed on the roots of the hair, and it shouldn't hurt as much. As you backcomb, you can leave a little slack in the dread to prevent tugging against the scalp with each stroke. You may have as many as 100 strokes per inch of dread. A lot of factors affect that number, but it gives you some idea of what kind of progress to expect. When you finish backcombing each dread, it should be fairly tight. It's possible to comb it so tight that it's difficult to push the teeth of the comb into the dread. This isn't necessary, but try to get it tight enough that there are no visible gaps or loose areas in the dread. If there are, you should comb through the dread from roots to tips again to tighten it. This process is called re-backcombing and should never be done to tighten finished dreads. More on this later in the maintenance section. After you get the technique down and are starting to feel comfortable with your new skill, you can speed things up a little with lock pepper. The pepper helps the comb push more hair forward evenly without creating more loops. With a little bit of practice, you'll be able to backcomb much quicker and still get smooth dreads that would normally take much longer. Because the lock pepper does make pushing more hair forward easier, it can, if misused, create poofy palm trees much faster than otherwise possible. That's why it's a good idea to practice a bit first without the pepper, and then slowly add it as your backcombing skills develop. Eventually, you will work your way to the tip of the dread. You'll know you're there because you'll have nothing else to hold on to. There's a few different schools of thought on how to properly finish the tip. My favorite is to leave a few strands of loose hair, and then tip rub them as tight as you can. Press the knotted ends back into the dread and trap it in by squeezing it all together with a rubber band. This band on the tip, unlike bands on the roots, can be as tight as you can get it. Using rubber bands at the roots and tips is optional, but I can't recommend it enough. It will save you hours upon hours of maintenance by preventing most of the loose hair that would normally accompany new dreads. One at the roots should be snug enough that it will stay put, yet not so tight it would be hard to roll or slide it if you tried. The band at the roots will help new growth lock up and keep your roots from growing together while they're new. After each dread is secured with its bands, you can palm roll it a little to improve its shape. Then it's on to the next one. Each dread should be combed and rubber banded before you break out the wax. So you're all done backcombing. Sweet. You're just about done. Each dread needs a little bit of wax. You'll probably notice that the surface of the wax seems really hard. This is normal. Use your fingernail to break the surface. The more you dig into it, the easier it will be. Which brings us to the next question. What's the right amount? Well, it depends a lot on the size and length of your dreads, but basically you want enough wax that you can feel it on the entire dread, but not anymore. On an average size dread, this is usually equal to the amount of wax similar in size to an M&M. Each time you add some wax, rub it between your thumb and finger to smooth it out and warm it up. Then work it into the dread completely before adding more. This will ensure that you don't end up with too much wax on the dreads and reduce whiteness from extra wax. Palm rolling is a great technique for working the wax in and shaping the dread. After adding wax and working it in, palm roll each dread a bit, squeezing and shaping it. At this point, they should look and feel pretty good, but you can improve them further with a hairdryer. If you have a hairdryer, this quick step will help melt the wax in fully and eliminate the whiteness sometimes seen after waxing. Just blast them with high heat and they should be good to go. Congratulations, your dreadies are complete. Maintenance is the difference between okay dreads and great dreads. Fortunately, it's not hard. Most of the work can be avoided if you care for them properly. The most important part of maintaining your dreads is keeping them clean. When you wash your dreads, the object is to get them as clean as possible. Clean dreads are not only healthier, they lock faster and smell a whole lot better. The best soaps and shampoos for dreads are those that are residue-free. These soaps are designed to rinse away completely and leave no residues or any part of themselves behind on the skin or hair. Truly clean hair tends to tangle and knot easily. This is because the surface of the hair strand is made up of cuticles that lay on top of each other like tiny shingles on a roof. When the hair is clean, these cuticles grab against each other as the hair moves around. This increases the tendency for the hair to tangle and makes it difficult for the hair to work its way out of knots. Always washing your dreads with residue-free soaps will help your dreads mature faster and ensure that new growth at the roots continues to lock up. Residues, like conditioners, leave a thin slippery film that coats the strand and fills the tiny gaps between the cuticles. This gives the hair a smooth, shiny surface and reduces the friction between the hair strands so the hair can slip out of knots and tangles. This is how soap residues slow down and in some cases prevent the hair from locking. Problems also arise when residues are allowed to build up inside the dreads. Residues help the dreads hold water and reduce the amount of air reaching the center of the dread. Imagine the tiny spaces between the individual hairs getting caked up with super thin layers of residue. The dreads can't dry properly and the water just sits there. Eventually, it begins to grow mildew. Growing mildew is unhealthy and it smells like old wet towel. Don't worry though, this isn't going to happen to you because you know how to get your dreads truly clean. So when you're ready to wash your dreads, you want to soak them down before you start soaping them up. When you have dreads, it's more difficult to move the lather from one part of your scalp to another. So applying a small amount of soap to separate parts of your scalp works much better. Lather the soap up a good bit. You don't have to scrub yet, just get a good lather all over. Now rinse the dreads, but don't worry about getting every bit of soap out because we're not done yet. Add some soap again to each of the areas, but just a small amount this time and lather it up again. You should get way more suds this time. Make sure you get your scalp nice and clean. You can rub your soapy dreads clockwise against your scalp and scrub it to tighten your dreads. Now rinse them for real. Take your time and get all the soap out. As your dreads tighten and mature, you will need to squeeze them a couple times like a sponge to rinse them thoroughly. Drying your dreads well is critical to their health. Because the hair is packed so tight in the center, the dreads can stay wet too long if the dreads are not dried properly. Residues left in the dreads can also build up over time and make it increasingly difficult for the dreads to dry properly. If you follow these tips and wash your hair with residue-free products, you won't ever have to deal with mildew in your dreads. Before you even reach for a towel, squeeze all the water you can out of them in the shower. You can usually shake them side to side and squeeze them again to get even more water out. Then grab them with a towel over your hand and squeeze them some more. Now you can wrap them in a dry towel for about 10 or 15 minutes before letting them air dry. Or you can dry them with a hair dryer. Never put them in a hat or tie them tightly together before they're dry. Loose hair is common in new dreads. You'll usually have more loose hair right after a shower. Fortunately, that's a great time to deal with it. The hair is free of dirt and residue and it's easy to dread ball. Dread balling is used to get the loose hair back in the dread it came from. To dread ball, simply gather the loose hair and separate it according to which dread it belongs to. This is where those clean sections come in so handy. While you work with one group of hair, be sure to hold the other out of the way to ensure it doesn't get tangled in. You'll also need to be careful not to entangle hair from nearby dreads. Start with your fingers near the tips of the hair and roll them around in little circles to make them knot. It takes a little practice, but eventually you should be able to form a small ball of knotted hair pretty quick. As you form your ball, slowly work your way down the loose strands towards the roots. When you reach the roots, you'll want to entangle the dread ball inside the dread. Make sure it's tangled in the roots really well or it will pop out and separate. A rubber band and a little wax will ensure it stays put and has a chance to lock inside the dread. You can speed this process up with a dread tool and some lock pepper. The pepper will make balling the hair up and getting it to knot super easy. As the hair is balled, you can use the dread tool to quickly pull it back and forth through the roots of the dreads and get it to tangle so it can't slip back out. It's important to understand that straight hair at the roots is normal. No matter how tight and mature your dreads are, you're always going to have some straight hair between the scalp and the start of the dreads. Because there will always be new growth that needs to dread, it's important to keep residues out of the hair to help the new lock up. There are several things you can do to help new growth dread. Clockwise rubbing is an effective way to make knots and new growth. Start by grabbing the base of the dread about 1/4 inch from the scalp. Press the base of the dread against the scalp and rub it in a small clockwise circle. Be sure that neighboring dreads are held away from the dread you're rubbing. After a couple minutes, you should feel some knotting in the hair. You'll actually improve with practice and be able to make knots much quicker. A dash of lock pepper will get you much better results in about half the time, so shake it if you've got it. Finger rubbing is a variation on clockwise rubbing that works well for very thin dreads or for creating knots in the body of a dread. Hold the straight hair you need to knot firmly between your thumb and first 3 fingers. Rub your thumb in clockwise circle to knot the hair. Be sure your fingers are free from oil and dry for best results. As with clockwise rubbing, lock pepper makes a huge difference. Do not re-backcomb dreads that feel loose. This is a common mistake that can prevent new dreads from locking up. After the dread has begun to mature, re-backcombing undreads it. It may feel tighter after re-backcombing, but the truth is that all the knots that had started to become dreads are once again knots, and now have to begin maturing all over again. It's important to understand that dreads loosen quite a bit during the first month or two before they begin to lock and get tighter. This is normal. You can help them lock by finger rubbing and clockwise rubbing, but do not re-backcomb them. There is one exception to the no re-backcombing rule. It's okay to re-backcomb if you have just finished backcombing and the dreads feel loose. It's normal for them to get looser over the first couple months, but you'll want to start with them nice and tight. Crocheting a dread is basically pulling the dread through itself to take up slack. Don't ever do this to tighten dreads. The wraps of hair created when you pull the dread through itself don't ever disappear. Crocheting is really only beneficial if your dread is matured with a loop of hair sticking out of it. Normally the dread will suck these loops in as it continues tightening, but every now and then a dread matures completely and the loop remains. Sticking the dread through these loops won't make them disappear, but it will tighten them up against the dread, which makes it look much better. Palm rolling has a variety of uses, including helping dreads tighten, smoothing out unevenness in a dread, working in wax, and helping knots form at the roots. To palm roll, squeeze your dread between your palms or the base of your thumb and roll it back and forth. Your grip on the dread will vary depending on its size and where it's located on your head. Finger rubbing may work better than palm rolling on very thin dreads, so experiment and see what you prefer. Itchy dreads and dandruff can normally be prevented by washing regularly with a residue-free shampoo. Since dreads don't tend to get oily like straight hair, there's a tendency to wait longer between washings. This normally isn't a problem, but it often leads to an inconsistent washing routine. Scalps like consistency, and varying your routine may bring on itchiness and/or dandruff. Simply returning to a consistent washing schedule will probably fix the problem. If you still have flakes, a medicated dandruff shampoo is the quickest way to get it under control. After 1 or 2 washings with a dandruff shampoo, you can return to a consistent washing schedule with a residue-free soap. Dread wax helps knots become dreads and helps control loose hairs and fuzzies. You'll want to keep a small amount of wax in the dreads at all times during the first month. After the first month, you can begin using an alternating routine using wax every other week. You'll be focusing on creating new knots with accelerator and lock pepper on the off weeks. This routine works great for getting dreads to lock up fast. Dry or brittle feeling dreads are a sign that more wax is needed. S-shapes or zigzags may also appear in dry dreads if part of the dread tightens faster than the other. A small amount of wax and some pulling and rolling will usually take care of this in a few weeks. You'll quickly develop a feel for how much wax to use and when you'll need to add some. After your dreads feel pretty tight and mature, you'll only need to add a small amount of wax as a moisturizer when your dreads feel dry. This will keep them strong and prevent breakage. Using locking accelerator helps your dreads tighten and mature faster by opening the hair cuticles and increasing friction between the strands. It can be sprayed on your dreads at any time, but it works best right after washing. For best results, spray your dreads while they're still damp after washing, and blow dry them or allow them to air dry. Try to get an even spray, leaving the dreads damp. You can lean over, hanging your dreads in front of you or to the side. This will allow you to spray your dreads without spraying your scalp. The salts in the accelerator can cause itchiness or dryness if allowed to dry on your scalp or skin, just like ocean water at the beach, so keeping it on the dreads is preferable. Here are a few pointers for those interested in bleaching or dyeing dreads. Any bleaching kit or dyeing kit will work for dreads and should be used in much the same way. The main differences are in application, coverage, rinsing, and conditioning. It normally takes a while to ensure even coverage over each dread. You'll need to work quickly so that the side you start on isn't sitting much longer than the side you finish on. Having extra help makes this a lot easier. Don't worry about trying to dye or bleach the inside of the dread. It's nearly impossible to work it all the way through the dread. You'll never see the inside of the dread, so this shouldn't pose a problem. Never re-bleach previously bleached dreads, and never leave products on longer than instructed. Rinsing every bit of bleach or dye out of your dreads is extremely important. This will take much longer than you might think. After rinsing, shampoo your dreads with a residue-free soap, but avoid using the deep conditioners that come with the products. Instead, use aloe or another moisturizing product made for dreadlocks. See our site for product recommendations.